What seeds are you planting? Seeds of Alchemy promotes conversations to inspire increased awareness and empowered awakening in the material world. Hello, beloved. This is a consciously curated podcast by Project Alchimie, intended to help you reclaim your why without fear, ego, or judgment. We thank you so much for being here. If you would like to get early access to ad-free episodes, join the Alchemy Ascension Tribe on Patreon. It's where you can make topic requests and dive further into discussion topics with a like-minded community. You can find links in the description or in the show notes below. Now let's dive into today's episode. How can you become more open to change and growth? In honor of everything going on, I want to use this time, today's pages, to acknowledge and share my thoughts on the observations I have concerning the racial injustices and unrest that exist in our world. I see people all of a sudden, quote-unquote, waking up to the systemic racism that plagues America. At the most basic point, it's becoming clear to me that this isn't a race issue per se, although it physically manifests as a man-made social construct. It's a fear issue. It's an ego issue. It's an issue of empathy, awareness, consciousness, love, and respect. When it all boils down, it's an issue of how we as a people, as human beings, can meet each other in the middle, how we can empathize with each other, how we can see, listen, and recognize each other, even though our paths, our life experiences may differ. As a being that has been exposed to, related with, and connected with various people, communities, cultures, and walks of life, both personally and professionally, I've witnessed firsthand the implicit bias that threatens people and communities of color. I've seen their voices be stifled, their chances and opportunities be dwindled, and I've also seen the trauma, the backlash, and the punishment for them speaking their minds, asking to be considered, begging to matter, demanding fair and equal access to resources, demanding fair and equal justice. And sadly, when confronting racial injustice, racial systems, racist social norms, and racist acts, and the conditioning of white supremacy, the attempt to correct white supremacy and beliefs and acts based in white supremacy. From the outside looking in, the message of racial justice, of the Black Lives Matter movement, and other social issues stem from a lack of empathy, acceptance, tolerance, individual wholeness, and compassion. I think most of the time, the conversations or perception of non-white communities are based on the idea that communities and people of color want to take, steal, or control, outshine, or dominate white spaces, that these communities want to aggressively assert their will and presence, which is funny because they're only asking to be considered, yet their culture, their sense of being, has been aggressively asserted on. They're only asking to be allowed in white spaces, to have and receive a chance to shine at all. They're asking to have an equal opportunity to advance, exist, thrive, to be considered as equals, to be seen as matter that matters, as does the rest of the world. After all, this is a free world, right? A free earth, right? Who and when was it decided that certain people or groups had to pay? We are all paying in some way, but does it have to be that way? Can the middle exist? Can balance exist? Can harmony exist? How do we get there to these elevated planes? How do we get to the actualization of higher love and consciousness? And there again, I say, empathy, acceptance, tolerance, individual wholeness, and compassion. For example, why is it okay for someone to tell a Black person they have to earn their right to be seen, considered, mattered, or supported? That they have to earn the right to basic needs and access? Then when they do that, they are told to shrink, be quiet, take the bare minimum, go somewhere else. Not even considering that they have to discover and reclaim their own worthiness, establish and uplift their own communities, and not considering that they are trying to heal generations of trauma, but with what help? With what resources? With what grace? How is that fair? And From what I mentioned before, I ask how? How do we as a people, as the human race, expect that to happen? How do allies expect that to happen? I'll give you another example of white supremacy. At the most surface level, Black women can't even find foundation shades that represent them when shopping for makeup. Why is that? Do they not matter? Why are they not considered or allowed in the beauty space? Secondly, Black men are gunned down for running, walking, driving, and sometimes for just existing through their presence alone, in addition to Black women. And why is that? Do they not have the right to live? Why are they not considered allowed to practice self-care, leisure, routine, or life? Why aren't they protected when engaging in these activities or while just existing? Socially, any outsider can see that it's a lack of empathy and awareness. Morally, it's a matter of corruption, privilege, and entitlement. Spiritually, it's a matter of warfare, alignment, practice, attachment, and judgment. Physically, it's a matter of color, space, and access. Emotionally, it's a matter of fear, avoidance, and trauma. And universally, it's a matter of lack, imbalance, and abuse of power on all sides. So what do we do? Where do we go? How do we progress? What now? After this summer that the Black community has had, we listen, we observe, we accept, we be patient, we have faith, and we continue to practice. The biggest thing is practicing empathy and radical acceptance. Acceptance that experiences and opinions, perspectives, and intentions differ. Empathy for that experience and tolerance for that difference. That's all. No one is saying everyone must conform to the same idea, path, beliefs, or practices even. We need to reach the middle ground by practicing more compassion, more acceptance, more empathy, more unconditional love of ourselves and each other. And that's easy to say, I know. We're getting there. I'm getting there. But honestly, I think the overall lesson is all about humility as well as empathy. And now it's being applied on a global, universal scale. The energy of love by way of empathy, humility, and compassion, I mean. That's my perspective. And others are allowed to exist in the same space with me with a completely different truth, with a completely different experience. And that's the point, my point exactly, that we need to be able to meet in the middle if we truly want to end white supremacy and invest in our greater collective generational healing. Are you threatened by that? If so, why? Recently, as tensions calm here in the US, this weekend is allowing me to see how I can take better care of myself and therefore have enough in the tank to nurture the collective. Sure, I've been through this lesson before, but that doesn't mean I can't relearn it or learn something new this time around. Now I'm recalibrating. Today, I'll be retreating, deviating into my spiritual healing and practice for me and my well-being, detoxing, releasing, shifting, taking it easy and slowly. This time, at present moment and year being 2020, has been a huge trial period, it seems. With the North Node in Gemini, it makes sense. But it really just feels like one big social experiment, not only for myself, but also the collective. And with it, I ask, what can be changed? What can be reformed? What can be added for perspective and context? What's the bigger picture? What's the exchange? What can be sustained or removed? What can be trusted? What is allowed to flourish and grow, and who is making that decision? What's allowed in new spaces of said growth, and who's making that decision? How do we trust and become more open to that growth? These are all questions I would have asked during meditation a year ago, but it's more than that this time around. We can't just observe these collective energies right now, or at least I can't. We actually have to feel them and work our way through them. And the same goes for me too. I'm trusting and believing in the outcome, in a better day, in a better tomorrow. But we'll see how it goes, because this is just another awakening in itself. That was a journal entry I wrote on June 5th, 2020, during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement in the summer of last year. Now being January 2021, at the time of recording this episode, I've decided to deviate from what was originally planned because white supremacists and terrorists attacked the U.S. Capitol in response to the president's consistent misinformation, negligence, and abuse of power, inciting acts of terrorism that forced the world to see there are two justice systems in America, all led, protected by, and rooted in white supremacy. So today, I thought we could talk about the Great Awakening, and therefore, calling in our greater generational healing. As we cover this topic, I'll be sharing some of my adjacent experiences to help put certain stages of awakening into perspective. Part 1, we'll start out with the Rude Awakening, which in the US at least, if we're talking about a bigger group of people rather than an individual awakening, that awakening has been to white supremacy, xenophobia, anti-Blackness, bigotry, suppression, oppression, all of the isms, basically everything the country was built on. It's been an awakening to the fact that there's class inequality, nepotism, capitalism, a two-party system fueled by money and greed, partisanship, that ultimately results in the death of the people and their needs not being heard or fulfilled. This awakening has also caused a large majority of Americans to see the failed social systems all across the country, that there is no fair and equal access, that it seems to be a battle, a war between tradition and intuition. There's been an awakening to how status and value are being put above social service and personal and collective health. It's being put above the mental health and well-being of individuals. And of course, there's been a massive awakening to the poor policing, abuse of security, selective protection, a lack of digital protection and safety, data mining, self-exploitation, corporate favoritism, privileged elitism, and a suffering planet. It's all come at the hands of a catalyst that the people couldn't have ever expected. A pandemic and poor government response to not only that, but calls for equality. Americans are also becoming more aware of all of the double standards, the social conditioning and trauma, not even just personal trauma, but the generational trauma that exists all throughout this country. And it brings me to the mindset of my awakening. When I was finally waking up to my behaviors and contributions, waking up to the fact that I had trauma and I needed to heal that before becoming a positive influence in society. Seeing the contrast between that and how these individuals were choosing to ignore their traumas and ignore the opportunities to break certain cycles, to grow or to change. There was a disconnect between us. Although that was happening, I couldn't let that stop me because I still wanted to see. I wanted to see what needed to be fixed. I wanted to heal it and I wanted to change. But those around me didn't. That brings me to this next phase of awakening that it seems we're in, which is resistance to change. Much like my experience with those around me at the time, there's this backlash that happens when awakening, when a group of people, a person, or a force of nature acts as a mirror, leaving no other choice but to acknowledge and see that change needs to happen. There's often violence or gaslighting, sabotage, deceit, hate, and grudges, or those who don't want to change sowing seeds of doubt so that change cannot happen. Sometimes it shows up as excuses, a refusal to take accountability, blame shifting, manipulating, avoiding doing the hard work. And at other times, it shows up as repeating cycles and patterns. For example, this showed up in my journey as those around me refusing to grow, refusing to awaken to unresolved traumas, to current struggles, and how they were connected and continuing to play out in their lives and therefore impacting my life, they were choosing resistance. They didn't want to change or put in the work to change. When I was acting as a mirror for them, their response was to discourage and sabotage my desires for change and seeking individuality, self-exploration and healing, seeking truth, using any recourse available. And it's not to say these individuals were evil or unjustified. They had unhealed wounds, unhealed pain. As I continued on with my spiritual journey and awakenings, I realized that I could not fault these individuals for their unhealed wounds, for their use of their free will, for the future they saw for themselves. And while I wanted all of us to be on the same page, to experience the journey together, I had to accept that I could not change them. I could not awaken them. I could not heal, fix, or bring them with me on my journey. Their journey was theirs. Mine was mine. We all get to choose whether we want to accept and welcome change into our lives, to confront, sort through, and rectify wounds, which may very well hurt, because more often than not is no template for that change. Or we can choose to resist it altogether and act out of fear, because healing isn't easy, awakening isn't easy, and sometimes it's far more enticing to ignore the trauma, to ignore the hard work. And so some choose to stay blind to the pain, the trauma, to the cycles, and the impact to their ego, their role and their perceived role in this world. Some choose to stay chained to the systems, tradition, to the way it's always been, as we all saw in the summer. And after watching the US Capitol be attacked by terrorists that experienced a completely different definition of justice, white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and racism won't go away if we don't make the time to be aware. And white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and racism won't go away if the human race chooses to ignore them. They will persist if we as a collective choose to not adopt empathy, if we don't choose to unlearn, correct, and educate ourselves on the trauma and damage that's born of them. Respectively, the systems propped up by them won't go away if allies refuse to learn and refuse to integrate the intricacies of allyship. Black Lives Matter, every day, in all ways, always. Systemic oppression, racism, colorism, ageism, ableism, sexism, tokenism, transphobia, and homophobia continues to plague every aspect of our modern day society. The trauma, discrimination, abuse of power, and privilege, as well as resource hoarding caused by this historic genocide, can end now with higher love and consciousness. To all those Black and beloved, I want to say to you, to take up space, even if you're scared. To heal your trauma, even if you're scared. To know your worth, even if it makes others feel threatened. And to unlearn self-hate, even if it is encouraged or aids in your success. To all beloved allies, I want to say to you, speak up, even if you're scared. Check your privilege, even if you're scared. Invest in reparations and justice, even if it makes you feel threatened. And unlearn biases, even if they are allowed or aid in your success. We all have to be willing to do the work and be willing to let others do theirs. This sentiment goes for any mass or individual awakening, or at least that's what I can speak on based on my journey. And with respect to today's topic, the Black Lives Matter movement is just one example of how an awakening can result in sowing better seeds. So, if you need a reminder of how you can affect positive change in the lives of others or just within your own healing journey, visit the Project Alchemy website, which will be linked in the show notes, for resources. As I have been, and as our community has been very moved by the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been amplified by the recent events in America, you can also visit the Black and Beloved page on the Project Alchemy website, which includes resources for anti-racism and healing racial trauma, linked in our show notes as well. The idea of oneness may come off as a hippie concept or a spiritual dream, but with that, I think it's important to recognize and accept our differences and our individual motivations, experiences, etc., because how we express them does affect others. It does affect our collective vibration and experience. Unity and love of self is a new paradigm. It's a new cycle, a new foundation, a new fluidity that allows for the change that we need. As we all wake up to the ways of the world that are rooted in white supremacy, in addition to our own individual healing journeys, more so Americans waking up to a society rooted in white supremacy, and contrasting it to my spiritual awakening, it seems to me that where we find ourselves is in the middle of the growing pains of an awakening. We're learning how to navigate and recognize those feelings of resistance, the challenge to stay committed to the task at hand, or feeling the call to implement reinstated or improved integrity, while still learning that awakenings are messy. We as a collective are uncomfortable, yet needing to accept the free will and sovereignty of another, while accepting and mindfully using our own to do better and to yield better. Speaking from experience, it can be hard to accept that we are all sovereign beings with the ability to heal and make our own choices. It can be hard to accept that choosing not to make a choice to move, choosing resistance is still a choice that we as beings have the right to make. And we can only hope that no harm comes from all beings choosing action and or non-action. However, every being's journey, purpose, and awakening is unique unto their own. And it's not up to anyone else to try to change, sabotage, or incite another's. That's their work to do, in their own time, if they so choose. And as I learned, it does no good to try to help those who don't want to be helped or don't want to do the work for themselves. And sometimes that's the hardest lesson. Learning that some people simply can't and won't come with us, and that it's not our job to be someone's wake-up call. And that's okay. Even that realization is serving a purpose too, where we can hold space for others, in that there's a fluidity, there's a peace and acceptance, there's a non-duality and allowance. It allows us to release our group conditioning, our attachment to duality, this good versus evil idea. It allows us to release our attachment to ego-based cycles and unconscious living, in addition to generational karma. That realization allows us to focus on our own journey, on what is in our control, and allows us to take personal responsibility, accountability for our individual healing, self-expression, our energy, our own self-actualization. That introspection is needed, and that change is needed. But to close out this episode, I do want to leave you with this. It all starts with us choosing change if we want to choose it, and not judging others if they don't want to choose change, but holding them accountable if they are inflicting pain, trauma, and harm onto others. Because our generational healing and evolution boils down to a matter of empathy and awareness, or rather, the lack thereof. And we have a choice, we have a say, and what we choose will affect the outcome, will affect the generations to come. So here are some questions to keep in mind as we all continue to journey through life. What does a free earth look like to you? How can you integrate elevated planes? How can you actualize higher love and consciousness? How can you practice more empathy and radical acceptance? Are you or do you feel threatened by opposing ideas, viewpoints, and non-congruent experiences? If so, why? What in your community, journey, or approach to life can be changed and or reformed? And lastly, how can you trust and become more open to change and growth? Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's episode with an open mind. We hope it inspires you to align with higher consciousness and welcome growth in all areas of your life. We hope you know you're supported, not only by the universe, but also by the Project Alchemy community. Feel free to make your way over to our show notes and description box for resource links, as well as the link to join our Alchemy Ascension tribe on Patreon. Follow us at Project Alchemy on Instagram to keep this conversation going. And if you prefer blogs, find the transcribed version of this podcast episode at projectalchemy.com/the-journal. With that, we send you peace and love, and we hope that you'll join us again in the next episode. Namaste, beloved.